Grace Hargrove pressed her thumbnail into the soft flesh of her palm and held it there until the pain was the only honest thing in the room. Blanche Hargrove's voice carried the length of the dinner table without effort. It was the kind of voice that had never needed to raise itself because rooms had always arranged themselves to receive it. Grace manages the household with wonderful efficiency, Blanche was telling Mr. Forsyth from the Second National Bank, her smile aimed with the precision of a woman who had spent 30 years deploying charm as a tool. But the company ledgers, we don't trouble her with those. Some women have a gift for figures. Our Grace has a gift for arrangements. Her gaze moved, with gentle apology, to the centerpiece on the table. White chrysanthemums Grace had cut that morning from the garden. You can see what I mean. Polite laughter. 6 people at the table, 6 polite smiles. The kind that don't commit to unkindness but don't resist it either. Grace did not look up. She pressed her thumbnail harder and studied the rim of her soup bowl and made the calculation she always made in this house, the cost of speaking against the cost of silence, the candles, the crystal. Blanche's voice, patient and unhurried, perfectly certain it would go unanswered. She swallowed what she had been about to say. Across the table, Alden Hargrove was cutting his bread. He had not laughed. He had also not spoken. At 26, she had already learned that those two things were not the same. She lifted her eyes exactly once, to the dark October window at the far end of the room, and she made herself a promise she had not known she needed until this exact moment. Before this season was out, every person at this table would know precisely what kind of head she had. If this story stays with you, subscribe and follow it to the very end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. The Hargrove house on Edgemoor Drive sat at the better end of Chestnut Hill, Philadelphia, the kind of neighborhood that had decided long ago what it thought of itself and saw no reason to revisit the question. Wide lawns, stone facades, brass door fittings polished to a specific brightness. The sort of house that required, as Blanche had informed Grace on the day she arrived as a new bride, a great deal of management. Grace had been managing it for 2 years. She was 26 years old, the only daughter of Bernard Caldwell, accountant, bookkeeper, and the most methodical man who had ever sat at a counting desk on Walnut Street. He had died 14 months before the wedding, of a cardiac event that took him on a Tuesday morning, between breakfast and the opening of his office, leaving behind 3 ongoing audits, a modest estate, and a daughter he had been training since she was 7 years old to do exactly what he did. Bernard Caldwell had not believed in limiting the education of a mind simply because it belonged to a girl. He had also been, in his quiet and orderly way, a practical man. He had known the world would not receive his daughter as an accountant. He had therefore taught her everything she would need to be one, said nothing about it to anyone, and let her carry the knowledge the way people carry things that truly belong to them. Close, without display, ready when needed. What the world saw when it looked at Grace was a composed, quietly watchful young woman, with the habit of going still in company, rather than performing animation she did not feel. What Blanche Hargrove saw was a girl from a respectable but unremarkable family, who had been a reasonable match when Alden needed one, and who had since proven adequate at flowers, and at receiving guests, and at not embarrassing the Hargrove name in rooms where names still mattered. The marriage had been arranged with the practical efficiency of 2 families, solving 2 different problems. Bernard had wanted his daughter provided for before his health failed. Alden's father had wanted his son settled before the elder Hargrove died and left the company's succession uncertain. The 2 men had known each other in the way of business acquaintances. Enough to trust the arrangement, not enough to know whether it would make either young person happy. It had not made Grace unhappy. That was the most honest accounting she could offer. Alden was not unkind. He worked long hours, came home tired, read the evening papers in the library, and was courteous at dinner. Occasionally, in moments she had come to recognize as his version of reaching towards something, he asked her opinion of things. Not business things. Books sometimes. The garden. What she thought of the new motor bus line on Germantown Avenue. She answered honestly, and he listened, and then they went to their separate rooms, and the house settled into the quiet of 2 people, sharing a life without quite sharing it. It was not the life Bernard Caldwell had imagined for her. She did not think it was the life Alden had imagined for himself either. But imagining and living were different transactions, and Grace had learned early from a man who reconciled ledgers for a living that you work with the numbers in front of you, not the ones you wish were there. The Hargrove Manufacturing Supply Company occupied a 4-story brick building on Girard Avenue and had done so for 31 years. First under Alden's father, and now under Alden, with a business partner named Victor Standish, who had been with the company since before either of them. Victor Standish was 53, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and possessed of the particular confidence of a man who had spent decades operating without being examined. He was charming at dinners and spoke well of Alden publicly, and had, as far as anyone in the company knew, been as steady as the brick building itself. Grace had met him a dozen times. She had noticed each time the way he looked at her. Not with interest, not with disrespect, but with the calibrated dismissiveness of a man who had assigned her a category and filed her there and had no reason to revisit it. A wife. Decorative. Present at dinners for symmetry. Not worth accounting for. She had noticed it the way she noticed most things. Without comment, and without forgetting. The trouble came on a Wednesday morning in November. Grace was in the front parlor reviewing the household accounts when she heard Alden come through the front door at 10:30, which was not his hour. He passed the parlor without looking in. She heard him go to the library. She heard the door close, not slammed, closed quietly, which was, she had learned, worse. Mrs. Crane appeared in the doorway. The housekeeper was a compact woman of 60, with the economy of movement of someone who had managed large households for decades and had long since stopped wasting effort on anything non-essential. She set a tea tray down and said, without preamble, "He came home early," and closed that door very quietly. Grace set down her pencil. She waited 20 minutes. Then she knocked, and when she received no answer, she opened it. Alden was standing at the window with his coat still on. On the desk behind him, a leather folder lay open. She could see columns of figures from across the room. "The Forsyth Review is Friday," he said without turning. "The bank is re-evaluating the terms of the company loan. I need the accounts reconciled before then." A pause. "Standish says they're ready. Our bookkeeper, Henshaw, says 3 line items don't reconcile with the delivery records." "Which line items?" Grace said. He turned then. He looked at her the way he did when something she said landed somewhere unexpected. "Materials purchases from the second and third quarters. 2 suppliers Henshaw doesn't recognize. Standish says they're subcontractors. Henshaw says the invoices don't match what was actually received." Grace crossed the room and looked at the folder on the desk. The figures were clearly typed. She ran her eye down the column once, then said carefully, "May I look at the full ledger?" Alden was quiet. She felt him deciding something. A motor car rattled past on the street outside and faded. "I have to be back at the office by 2, he said. "Then leave me the ledger," she said, "and I'll have something for you by 2. He held her gaze for a moment. Not with doubt, exactly, but with something more complicated than doubt. Then he picked up the leather folder and set it on the desk in front of her. 3 years of quarterly records in the cabinet behind you, he said. Invoices are in the red box on the lower shelf. He was at the door before he paused. "Grace," she waited. "Henshaw is a competent man." "Then I'll find out what he missed," she said. He left. She sat down, opened the ledger to the first page and got to work. She found the first irregularity in 40 minutes. A materials payment in the second quarter of 1907 to a company listed as Caldwell Brothers Supply for $84. She set down her pencil. She opened the red invoice box and searched it. The Caldwell Brothers invoice was there, $84, signed by the receiving foreman, stamped paid. She set it aside and pulled the corresponding delivery record. $84 worth of steel fittings, logged as received. She held both documents side by side. Then she went back to the ledger and turned pages, not reading for story, but for pattern. The way her father had taught her, "You're not looking for what's there, Grace. You're looking for what keeps appearing in the same corner." By noon she had found 9 discrepancies, all in the same direction. Payments to 2 suppliers, Caldwell Brothers Supply and a company called Renwick Materials, recorded at amounts higher than the delivery records justified. The difference accumulating, quarter by quiet quarter, in a line item labeled Operational Contingency. She knew that category. Bernard Caldwell had audited a firm once that used it exactly this way. He had called it a drain. She opened her notebook and began recording. Date, ledger entry, invoice amount, delivery quantity, discrepancy, column after column of careful, quiet arithmetic. Mrs. Crane arrived at 1 o'clock with sandwiches and looked at the spread of papers across the desk without comment, which was, Grace had come to understand, Mrs. Crane's most eloquent form of response. "Is Mr. Standish expected at the house today?" Grace asked, not looking up. "Thursdays usually," Mrs. Crane said. "Tomorrow." Would you let Mr. Hargrove know I'd like a word before dinner? Mrs. Crane looked at the table, the open ledgers, the invoice box, the notebook covered in Grace's small, even hand. She looked at it the way a person looks at something long suspected and now confirmed. Your father was Bernard Caldwell, she said, the accountant on Walnut Street. Grace looked up. He audited my previous employer's estate 12 years ago, Mrs. Crane said. Found a manager who'd been falsifying the payroll for 7 years. She paused at the door. He was thorough. She left. Grace turned back to the 1906 ledger and kept working. Alden came home at 4:30 and stood in the library doorway, looking at what she had done with his afternoon. The papers organized into rows, the ledger open at a marked page, her notebook dense with figures, and he came in and sat down across from her without being asked. 9 confirmed discrepancies in 1907 alone, she told him, each one in the same direction. The ledger records more than the deliveries justify. The difference runs into the operational contingency line. She turned the notebook so he could read. I've only examined 1907. I have 2 more years. He was very still. How much confirmed? $312. For 1907 alone, she held his gaze. If the pattern holds across 3 years, you are looking at significantly more. The Forsyth meeting is Friday morning. I know. Give me tonight and tomorrow. He sat forward, elbows on the table, and looked at her notebook, not with the polite performance of attention she had learned to recognize in 2 years of dinners, but with the focus of a man who has been surprised and is not pretending otherwise. Standish comes tomorrow, he said. I know. Let him make his report as usual. Don't change anything, she paused, and don't mention what I've found. His jaw moved in the controlled inward way she associated with disciplined anger. All right, he said. He stood, then stopped. It was becoming familiar, the pause, the almost exit, the last thing he'd nearly left unsaid. I owe you an apology for what my mother said at dinner. You don't, Grace said. Finish the work first, then we'll know what's owed. Victor Standish arrived the next afternoon at 2:15. He came to the front door, not the side entrance, which told her he had spent the ride over constructing something. She was at the library desk when she heard him in the entry hall. She heard him ask for Alden. She heard him stop in the hallway outside the library door. She closed her notebook. The door swung open. Victor Standish stood in the frame with his hat in one hand and his document case in the other, and the look he gave her was the same one she had always received from him. Rapid, assigning, dismissing. Except this top snagged on the papers spread across the desk. His eyes went to the ledgers, to the invoice box, to her closed notebook, to her face. Mrs. Hargrove, he said pleasantly, I didn't realize Alden had brought in outside help. He didn't, she said. I offered. Something moved in his expression. Not alarm, but the specific alertness of a man who has operated in confidence for a long time, and has just felt the ground shift a fraction beneath him. He filed it. He did not show it further. He was too practiced for that. Don't let me interrupt, he said, and continued down the hall. She opened her notebook and kept writing, and she thought about what she had found at 9 that morning, in the 1905 ledger. The thing that had made her set her pencil down and sit very still for a long time. Caldwell Brothers Supply. She had first noticed it in the 1907 records. She had assumed it was coincidence. In the 1905 ledger, the name appeared earlier, smaller, as if being tested. 1 payment, $47, 3rd quarter. And this time she had found a contact address on the Caldwell Brothers invoice. An address on Vine Street, an address she knew. It was the address of her father's old office. Someone had registered a false company under the Caldwell name, using her father's address. The dates of the earliest payments placed the registration within months of Bernard Caldwell's death. She had not let herself feel it yet. The accounting wasn't finished. She pressed her pencil to the page and kept going. She finished at 11 that night. The lamp had burned low and her right hand had a cramp she'd been ignoring for the last hour. But the final column was totaled, the final discrepancy recorded. The number at the bottom of the summary page sat in her chest like a stone. $4,180. Across 3 years of quarterly accounts, 2 fraudulent suppliers, and a household ledger, for a 4-month period when Standish had temporarily managed both sets of books. Every dollar documented. Every discrepancy cross-referenced against its source. Every Caldwell Brothers payment traced to a corresponding real supplier, a real delivery, and the second fraudulent charge, laid on top of it like a shadow that only appeared at the right angle. She wrote the total at the top of a clean page and underlined it twice. Then she added a line below. See attached note regarding Caldwell Brothers Supply. False company registered at Bernard Caldwell's former office address, Vine Street. She closed the notebook. She thought about what that meant. Victor Standish had known her father. He had used the Caldwell name as a shell, because it carried weight at the Second National. Weight her father had spent 30 years earning. He had also, she now understood, known that if Grace ever looked at these books and saw the Caldwell name, she might assume she was too close to it to be objective. He had used her grief as camouflage. She had used it anyway, to find him. She picked up her notebook and went to find Alden. He read the summary standing. He turned each page with the care of a man afraid of what followed, and when he set it down, he said nothing for a long time. Victor came recommended by my father's attorney, he finally said. He's been with this company since before I came into it. He looked at the summary page. He's been sitting across from me every Thursday for 3 years. Yes, Grace said. He's the one who suggested our marriage. Alden's voice had gone very flat. He told my father you'd be a suitable match. He arranged the introduction. He looked up at her. He kept you in this house. She had not known that. She held it quietly. Where you weren't looking at the company books, Alden continued. Where no one would think to ask. His jaw was tight. And I stood there at that dinner and let my mother say. Stop, Grace said. He went still. It doesn't help to revisit that now. The Forsyth meeting is tomorrow morning at 9. She set the notebook on the desk between them. You have what you need. Mr. Forsyth read the full accounting in 11 minutes. He set it down, aligned its edges with the edge of the table, and looked at Grace. You prepared this? Yes. Where were you trained? My father was Bernard Caldwell. He practiced for 30 years on Walnut Street. She held the banker's gaze without apology. He trained me from the time I was 7. Forsyth looked at the accounting once more. Then he looked at Alden. Then he made a note and said, without ceremony, the documentation is thorough. We will engage our own accountant to verify, but the pattern is unambiguous. The bank will not be calling in the loan. He looked at Grace before they left. Your father's name appears on a fraudulent business registration. The firm will note it in the record, not as a charge against him, but as evidence of the deception. It establishes how far back the scheme ran, and it clears the Caldwell name rather than damaging it. A pause. He'd have been pleased this morning. Thank you, she said. She meant it. Victor Standish was arrested the following Thursday. The charge was criminal fraud, the kind that carried prison time. A judgment recorded in the public court documents and reported in the Philadelphia Public Ledger on a Saturday morning. Grace read it over breakfast, set the paper down, and sat with the specific quiet of a thing completed. In December, Blanche hosted her annual dinner. Grace wore a deep green dress. She took her seat, and when Mr. Forsyth arrived, Alden had sent the invitation himself. The banker came directly to her before anyone else, shook her hand with both of his, and said, loudly enough for the room to hear clearly, Mrs. Hargrove, I hope you'll consider taking on private accounting review as a professional engagement. The Second National has several clients whose books would benefit from exactly your quality of attention. The room went quiet. 6 people, 6 expressions, rearranging themselves in real time. Grace thanked him. She meant that too. Blanche said nothing. Her face did something complicated, and then composed itself. Later, when the guests had gone and Mrs. Crane was seeing to the lights, Alden found Grace in the library, returning the ledgers to the cabinet where they belonged. He stood in the doorway with his jacket off and his collar loosened and looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. I should have. He started. You handed me the ledgers, she said, without turning. When it mattered, you handed me the ledgers. She heard him cross the room. He stopped a few feet behind her, close enough that she was aware of the specific quality of the silence between them. Not the polite, managed distance of 2 years of a practical arrangement, but something with actual weight in it, something honest. My father used to say the company's books were its conscience, Alden said. That you could tell everything worth knowing about a man by what he allowed in his accounts. A pause. I didn't know what was in mine. You found it in 3 days. It wasn't 3 days, she said quietly. It was 30 years, my father's 30 years carried forward. She felt the shift in his breathing. Then I owe Bernard Caldwell a debt I can never repay. She turned. He was closer than she'd realized, and the expression on his face was the one she had wanted from him for 2 years, without quite knowing how to name it. Not managed, Not performed, not the courteous distance of a man honoring an arrangement. Just present, just true. You can start, she said, by letting me see the books from now on. He almost smiled. It started at the corner of his mouth and moved the way things move when they've been held still too long and are finally allowed. The books, he said, are yours. She turned back to the cabinet and finished returning the ledgers, one by one, in their correct order. Outside, the December evening pressed cold and clear against the glass, and the library was warm, and for the first time since she had come to this house as someone else's practical solution to someone else's problem, it felt entirely like hers. Her father had been right. A woman who could read the bones of a thing would never be lost. She was not lost. She knew exactly where she stood.